You know, I do like open source, and that's the wonderful thing about being here is that if you like open source, you're automatically preaching to the choir. And I do have the obligatory slide in here showing how wonderful open source is, which is truly a requirement if you're going to be here. And one of the reasons it's become so awesome is that we're really changing the world, and we've done that in large part because our licenses have stabilized, and we kind of all understand them, and we rely on them. And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about that as we celebrate our relationship with the licenses. Thank you. Okay, so these we have a great relationship with the licenses because they enable the freedom that we need as a society. They make us peers, but very often this freedom is the freedom to freeload, which leads to unemployed developers, which is a tragedy. So this problem is simple. We just have too many people who think a free beer is the way it works, and we even have people who don't just not pay. They sometimes break the rules of our licenses, and these are cheaters, and this is really a problem. And it's funny too because cheating isn't good for anybody. The people who freeload, it costs $15 to rent a truck to take your plywood home. In the end, spending a little bit of money is a good thing for everybody. Which is funny, right? Because for some people, right, you show them the right logo and all of a sudden their reaction is very different. And this leads to the central catch-22 of our community, is that we're changing the world and we're making everything better, but we've got a catch-22. It's difficult for us to get paid as open source developers. So I'd like to propose a new license, an open source eventually license, which Monty, I don't know where he is, but he's proposed it and he calls it business source. And basically, it's a proprietary license that becomes open source after a period of time, and it's one of a class of ransom licenses. And this has all been done before. But before I get into how it works, I know that more licenses is not good. I feel the same way about this as you do. And so, the basic idea is that you release some software under version 1.0 under a proprietary open source eventually license, and people pay you for that. 6 months later, it becomes automatically open source. You release version 2, people pay you for that, and version 1 becomes open source. Everybody's happy. People have new software. It's good software. You're getting paid. Everybody's good. So I'd like to present some evidence that this works. We did a MedStarter. This is a crowdfunding. And you see here we did a dual licensing model. The people who paid for the proprietary license, there were very few of them, but they gave us the most money. The open source eventually people, there were a lot more of them, but they actually did contribute significantly. But really, what's really interesting is that after we went open source, everyone stopped paying. Interesting, huh? We did find one official cheater. So I do think we're going to need to have standards, right? We shouldn't be doing this over and over again. So I wanted to try to create a standard open source eventually license. And to do that, I wanted to have a structure that would allow you to go onto GitHub and still programmatically verify what the license was, so you could tell who was using open source eventually licenses. So the file structure is you have this open source eventually license, and then you've got 3 other files. The target license tells you what open source license you're going to end up with in the end. Obviously, the date is when that is going to happen. So first of all, the first useful thing we do is we limit the choices, and this is how this license is open source friendly. We limit the choices to reasonable licensing choices that are known good. You cannot choose a license that's not on the list. If you choose a license that's not on the list, it automatically reverts to a reasonable license choice. The other thing is the date. I personally don't know exactly what the date should be, but I think any technology that does not become after open source is 2 years. This is not the copyright external thing. Mickey Mouse is out, right? It's not going to happen. So this next file is kind of self-explanatory, so I'll skip to my process. I've got a GitHub repository. You'll see the link in a second. I'm going to do issues and pull requests until the idea stops sucking. So please criticize using GitHub. As soon as we have gotten something that's not terrible, we're going to go ahead and use the same process that the GPL version 3 did for public commentary on this. Now, one of the things that I think is important is that even if you disagree with me, and I know that our community sometimes has kind of internal battles that are not terribly productive. Both of these animals have been dead for a very, very long time. So I don't want to have that happen again. If you disagree with me, that's more of a reason for you to work with me. Please help me make my license not suck, so when other people use it, at least you get the benefit. And then Monty's having a talk on these kinds of things. I encourage you to go to that. And I'm having a talk on crowdfunding open source at OSCON. Please come and see us.